Good morning, First Christian Church. This is your midweek message, and if you have any questions for these lovely people from their sermons or others, then you could write it down on a slip and put it in the back of the drop box in the back of the auditorium.
All right. Well, we're actually talking about Doug's message a couple weeks ago, and he was specifically in Acts chapter 13 through Acts chapter 14, verse 28. And so he was talking about the church in Antioch, specifically engaged the idea of church planting, but also discipleship development, so that the whole idea of a multiplying church, one that disciples and one that sends. And so in all of that, you have to be able to have people to disciple, people who are able to disciple others, people who are willing to go and able to be sent. And so there's this whole willingness thing in the kingdom of God, then, to be where you are or to go wherever God calls you. And so he talked about a few things in there. Some of it was the development, and some of it was the sending. And so I just want to engage that a little bit with you guys today. How can we be a church that is a developing church?
Developing, as in like you're helping, for say, like our church grow, or as in helping other churches grow?
So for us specifically, one of the jobs of pastors, of elders, is to equip the saints. And so growing disciples here to be equipped to share the gospel themselves individually. So it's not just the work of ministers or the work of a deacon or of an elder. It's actually in every member calling that we're to be sharing the gospel with those around us. And so how can we develop more disciples here so that we're equipped to share the gospel?
I feel like one way to really start that is to get people interested.
Mm-hmm.
So then, because if people are interested in it, then they're going to want to spread the news or tell other people because they're interested in it and they want to get other people interested in
Mm-hmm.
it, in which case would help a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. I think you're right, Jeffrey. Part of it is kind of a culture shift that we do need to see happen, and I think we're seeing it happen. But one of the things that is pretty clear throughout the church in America at times is that we come to get rather than we come to be equipped. And so it's like, man, I go to church so that I can be filled up. Yes, but are you being filled up so that you can go out? Or are you just coming in and being filled up to feel good? And so like the whole equipping thing is so that we'll actually come together, be encouraged through fellowship, through prayer, through the breaking of bread, through the apostles' teaching, so that we can go out into an unbelieving world and share the gospel. And so getting people interested, yes, some of that we can do, but then ultimately that relies on the work of God's Holy Spirit too.
Mm-hmm.
Because without Him urging people's hearts, I mean, we can work all day, but if He's not in the midst of it, then we can only get so far. And so as people get prepared and they go out, then we've been engaging the idea of an every member ministry. That means that where we are, we need to be doing that before we go anyplace else. Maybe you guys haven't heard this before, but as Sarah and I were preparing to go to Japan, we were coming across a few different missionaries who were very much talking about, I can't wait until. And so they would fill in the blank with, when I get there, I'll do this ministry. And so like one of the things that we really grabbed onto was like, and if I can't do it where I'm at, I probably shouldn't be going. I shouldn't be a sent person if I can't do it where I am. And so like we need to learn how to be sharers of the gospel where we are. How do you think we do at FCC in this right now? Where's there room for growth? What ways are we moving in this direction? What do you see?
I think that we're doing well, but I think one of the things that is a challenge just culturally, and this is something that we're not immune to here in Tuscola, is the idea that Christianity is kind of something that's practiced 1 or 2 days a week. And Tuscola is no exception in the fact that it's very sports oriented, and there's a lot of other things going on. And it's kind of like if you're really into Marvel movies, when a new Marvel movie comes out, you can be really excited about it. You go to the theater, and then you leave the theater and you're done. You go back to your life until the next one comes out. And Christianity is often practiced that way, like, okay, this is time for church, or this is time for Christianity, but now we're going back to life. And obviously, I would love to say that we don't act that way here in Tuscola, but I mean, I think that's just a cultural norm for us. And so while I do think this church has more people involved for its size than any church really I've been a part of in various ministries, there's still that cultural mindset lingering that church is kind of a now but not here thing, and overcoming that is going to be tough, but I think we're in a good place.
Brian, I've heard you talk about recently that you'd love to see people not choose the church because they have nothing else going on, but to choose God and the church first. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, and it's a hard thing coming from somebody who's on staff at a church, because when the choice is between, like, there'll never be a choice between work and church for me.
Right.
But I do feel, and this isn't something that speaks directly to the church here at Tuscola. This is just a ministry experience thing in general. I feel like a lot of the time, if we have events going on in our lives and events going on at church, we choose the church event when there's nothing else going on over here. If there's anything going on, whether it's school or whether it's work or whether it's family or whether it's sports or whatever it is, church is what we do when none of that stuff is going on. And I would love to just see the witness and the difference we would make on society if more and more we would be like, I can't go to that because there's a church thing. And I know that's easier said than done, and it's not always that simple, but I think that a lot of times I hear complaining from Christians about how they schedule sporting events on Sundays, and they schedule sporting events on Wednesday nights, and they schedule, they never used to do that. And now, well, they do that because you go to that stuff.
Right.
If parents stopped going to those things and said, hey, it's Sunday, we're not, eventually when they run out of volunteers, they're going to stop scheduling stuff on Sunday. And so I think it would be a great witness for us to make those priorities, but I also know it's not always that easy, and it's not my intention to guilt anybody that misses church, for a certain reason. It's just something I would like to see overall.
Just a little more prioritizing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Jeffrey, you're in high school, and while I know you're not a football guy on the team and stuff, one of the things that probably is hard for students, and you can relate to this, is like choosing a youth group event over a high school event. So, like, for instance, for the football guys, it's probably really hard to say, hey, I'm going to go to CIY this summer instead of that week of intensive summer workouts.
Right.
That's a hard choice, right?
Yeah, but for now, at least the senior-wise, since seniors are able to go for CIY Move, they're able to go because they don't have to go and practice for football for next year because they're seniors.
Okay.
Which is one of the...
So after they've graduated, they'd still have that last year, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is nice. And which, honestly, for CIY Move, that's a smart move. But for other people, I know for the most part, at least for us in Tuscola anyways, some of the coaches will let you go do that stuff. And which is nice of them. And which I appreciate. But then there's some other coaches where it's like, if you miss practice, you are gonna have to do like 6 laps around the track or something like that, or you're gonna have to do like a few miles or something like that because you missed practice, or if you miss up to like 6 practices or something, which they might do every day for a week, but since they're at CIY, they can't go to any of those practices. They might get forced to get kicked off the team.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question, Jeffrey, just from your perspective. Like, so you've mentioned a little bit about like the pressures that you can feel from being a part of a sport or a program, or maybe even teammates, not always, coach. And sometimes it's felt, sometimes it's real. But what about this? Do you think sometimes even when a student wants to make a choice of God or church over whatever's going on, do you think sometimes it might be the parent who's pressuring?
Yeah, for sure. Because then sometimes the parents are probably more like, no, you need to focus more towards this because this could get you a scholarship, as of where going to CIY Move can't get you a scholarship to a college. So in which case, yeah. But
Well, I think that brings up a good point. And obviously, I'm all for supporting parents and student relationships, but this at least does expose the fact that sometimes we as parents, we can get it wrong. And we can actually aid in our child making a decision that might not be the wisest. And so just being a parent myself, I know that I do make mistakes with that. And so I would just encourage anyone who's trying to make God the priority or church the priority, whether it's adult, whether it's coach, whether it's student, whether it's child, to try not to be completely influenced by other people, but make that right decision for yourself individually. And that can be hard when you're feeling pressure from any level. Sometimes it can be a spouse, even like, hey, we're not spending enough time, and those things are all real. So there's balance, but then there's also choice and prioritizing. And so that stuff gets tricky sometimes. But Brian, I really agree with what you're saying is like probably more often than not, we see people choose everything else first. It'd be nice if we started seeing God being chosen first once in a while. And then that grows to more often. And then it grows to God's just going to be chosen. Anyway, great discussion. Doug talked about the developing, but also the sending. And so what do you think is difficult about being a person who says, you know what, I'm going to go do something different for God, or being sent? What do you think probably weighs into that for people, as far as if God has called you into something that you didn't suspect, or something that's new or different or scary, or even actually moving to another place to follow him? What do you think that looks like?
There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, involved in it, and especially if you're going to be relocating. When you relocate, literally everything changes. Even if it's not a huge culture shock, everything down to where you get your food and your gas and everything changes. And the only thing many times that you're going to take with you is God. And so you're going to have to really trust that this is what God is calling you to do. Otherwise, you could wind up resentful, you could wind up lonely, and you might wind up some of those things anyway. But when God is calling you to make a change, that's scary, because you have no idea what it's going to lead to.
Yeah, Brian, you actually made this decision recently because you went from being in St. Joe to Tuscola, and you weren't just making the decision for yourself. It affected your wife and your daughters. And how does that factor into following God?
I think that the most important thing for me, and it was a very hard decision to make, especially growing up, moving around a lot, making my kids move, whether they, really wanted to or not, was very difficult, especially since, I have the benefit of meeting the people I'm going to work with before we move. They don't get to go to the school until we're already here. And so it was a very hard decision to make. I think the most important thing for us, for Karen and I, and going through it, was making sure that not only did we see clearly that this was something God was calling us to do, but that the girls saw that too, that we talked about as a family. This is something that God is calling us to do. And so we're not just moving because, we want to mess up your life. We're moving because we're trying to be obedient to God, and making sure that they saw that element of it as well. And then, you know, that doesn't necessarily make it easy, but it makes it at least understandable, I think. So that was huge.
Yeah. So in talking about following God and trusting Him, those are obedient issues as well. And so I know we've talked about this before, but have you ever regretted saying no to God before?
No. I don't recall if it was you who said it or if I heard it from someone else, where they said that or it might have even been Brian. I honestly really don't recall who said it, but I heard it somewhere, and they said that if they don't do what God said, then they'll regret it in the future. But if they do it now, they really don't go back and say, I regret doing what God said to do.
Right. So you haven't regretted saying yes, but you would regret saying no.
Right.
Is basically what you're saying.
Right.
I think I've heard Brian say that before too. And so
I'm a wise guy.
yeah, he is a wise guy. So can you expound on that a little bit?
I mean, I can't think of a single time when God called me to do something and I was like, man, I don't know if that's scary, or that's unpleasant, or that's out of my comfort zone. And I went ahead and did it. That afterward, my reaction wasn't, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so glad that God pushed me to that, and I'm glad that I was obedient. I've never gone back and been like, God, what were you thinking? Mm-hmm. Why did you call me to do that? That didn't make any sense. Might not have made sense at the time, but eventually, there have been lots of times that I've chickened out and then been like, man, I really wish I would have just done what God wanted me to do.
Yeah.
I probably missed out on something, or somebody else missed out on something. And yet that still isn't the motivation it should be to be obedient every time. Mm-hmm. I don't learn that lesson as well as I should, but it is definitely consistent.
Yeah, I think the times that I've regretted really tend to be along the lines of, I felt like God was urging me to talk to someone, whether it be an awkward situation or whether it be a stranger, or I just felt inside that the Spirit was prompting me, and I was just like, it was easy to figure out a way to justify not. It's like, is that God? Is that not God? But in my heart of hearts, I knew He was trying to stir me to go outside of my comfort zone and share. Those times that I haven't, I've thought later, what if that was their encounter? Did I just steal eternity from someone by not being obedient? Ultimately, I'm not responsible, I know, for everyone's salvation. That's Jesus. He's the Messiah. But my obedience in these things matters. And so, I've regretted not being obedient. But like you're saying, whenever I've said yes in those instances, I've found myself more wowed and awed than I have been displeased. And it's like, man, God, I wasn't expecting that. Thank you for letting me be a part of that. Okay. So that's very true. Anyway, so if you haven't listened to Doug's sermon from a couple weeks ago on Acts 13 through 14:28, I want to encourage you, go back. It's on our YouTube station. So if you go to YouTube and you look up First Christian Church Tuscola, and you tune in for that week, Doug had a great sermon about the church in Antioch being both an equipping, discipling church and ascending and going church. And both are important aspects to what we do. We do need to be a church that prepares workers to go out and share the gospel. And so whether it's go out into your community or whether it's go across the world to share Jesus with an unbelieving world, it's important work, and that's what we're about. So again, tune in to Doug's sermon on Acts 13 through 14:28. Thanks for being with us. Hope you enjoyed the midweek message.